I'm really thrilled to be here because I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics. And it might be a little bit strange for some of you who are fans of The Office, seeing me play this annoying, strange beet farmer, paper salesman, who is now going to talk about the actor who plays him, who is a different person, is now going to be talking about his religious faith and what he loves about his religious faith. And it's a very exciting time right now in the Baha'i community because this year is the 200th anniversary, the bicentennial of the birth of the founder of the Baha'i Faith, whose name is Baha'u'llah. And that name translates to the glory of God. So I'm going to be talking a little bit. I know some of you are Baha'is who probably know a lot more about the Baha'i Faith than I do. So my apologies to you. And some of you know zippo nothing nada about the Baha'i Faith, like Dari. So I'm mostly going to be addressing you guys who don't know anything about the Baha'i Faith, and specifically from the point of view of who was this personage, Baha'u'llah, because I like to refer to him as a spiritual revolutionary. His teachings, his life, his work, the movement, the worldwide movement that he started is a spiritual revolution. That's how I view it. So I just want to share a little bit that I know about Baha'u'llah, some perspectives on him, some perspectives on the Baha'i Faith, what the Baha'i Faith is, yeah, that's it. So I'm going to write the name out so you can see it here. So before I go into who Baha'u'llah is, there's a way that I like to describe what the Baha'i Faith is and how it works. There's a wonderful word in English derived from, I believe, I'm going to say Latin, but it might be Greek, so I'm going to forget it. I think it's Greek, actually. And that word is cosmology. I don't know, is there a translation? Cosmology is an overarching philosophy. It's from cosmos, cosmosology, study of ology. Cosmos is the universe, study of the universe. So it's an overarching philosophy. Is there an Icelandic word that's similar to cosmology? Ring any bells? Sorry?
Alheims.
Alebs?
Alheims.
Alheims?
A-L-H.
That's cosmono.
E-I-M.
Yeah, so overarching philosophy, okay? So I want to go a little bit into what the Baha'i cosmology is. But before I do that, let's just look at some other, in a nutshell, some other cosmologies. So if you're an atheist, what's the atheist cosmology? This is interaction. We can have a conversation. It's all right. What are some aspects of the atheist worldview? Anyone?
Religion is redundant.
Religion is redundant, sure. Okay.
There's no divinity.
No divinity.
We are here by chance.
We're here by chance. Science is very important, right? In the atheist philosophy, and basically science is what we need to understand the world, that there was a big bang and there was elements and forces and energy and molecules that were formed, and then solar systems, and on this remote ball of dirt in this remote nondescript galaxy, there was evolution, there was a spark of life in the oceans, and evolution is a big part of what it is to be an atheist, kind of science versus unfounded belief, let's say. And and what else? We are essentially, life was created, first there was like shrimp, and then like lobsters, and then like bunnies, and then badgers, and then giraffes, and then humans, right? So there was evolution. And the only difference between us and apes is essentially we have bigger brains, we have greater cognition. So we can understand our deaths, we can create works of great art, we can fall in love in ways that animals can't. But this is a result simply of the evolution of our brains. Our brains have gotten bigger. And then when we die, what happens in this cosmology?
Nothing.
Nothing. That's it. Your consciousness goes out. It's like a light switch. Boom. That's it. That's the end. And so there isn't any meaning in the universe other than whatever meaning that you decide to give it, right? So if your family is important to you and that gives you meaning, great. If Working in nature gives you meaning. That's fantastic. Creating art gives you meaning and purpose. Fantastic. So this is essentially the worldview, the cosmology of an atheist. What's the cosmology of Christianity?
Return
Just a
of
few little
Christ.
kernels. Yep.
Return of Christ, rapture, going to heaven.
Right. Rapture, return of Christ. You're starting at the end. Okay. The return of Christ. That Christ will come back. There will be a rapture, and that the believers will go to heaven. What else? Some other aspects of the cosmology. I'm boiling it into a nutshell, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 different sects of Christianity. So it's, of course, there's great differences.
The physical form of Christ is the Son of God.
Christ is the Son of God, right? So there was the Virgin Mary, and God put his seed into the Virgin Mary, and he gave his only Son to save the world, right? So Christ took the sins of humanity on his shoulders in his act of sacrifice of his life. He's absolved us of our sins. The only thing that we need to do is give ourselves to Jesus Christ. And after 3 days, he arose, went back to his Father, the triune God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is how Christians understand God. And salvation awaits anyone if they're baptized and they give themselves over to Jesus. So 2 very different cosmologies. So let me go a little bit into what the Baha'i worldview, overarching belief system is. So in the Baha'i Faith, there is only one God, and this God, this creator, is worshipped by all the religions, essentially unknowable, an all-loving, all-seeing, creative force in this universe and in an infinite number of universes beyond this universe. So the greatness, power, majesty, and especially the mystery of God, whether you call it God, Allah, Jehovah, the Great Spirit, whatever you call it, there is only one God in the Baha'i cosmology. Okay. Another aspect of the Baha'i cosmology is that this God, this creator, God, this arrow, in case you were wondering, this creator educates humanity spiritually through the ages, through the years, by sending divine teachers down with God's unfolding message. So many of these divine teachers you've heard of. Jesus is one of them, according to the Baha'i Faith. Okay, I know some of you can't read this. Moses, Abraham, the Buddha. These are Muhammad, Zoroaster, yes, several others, but the purpose of these divine teachers is to educate humanity spiritually. So just as we're evolving technologically, we're evolving materially, think of it like iPhone updates, or different iPhones. So you had an iPhone 3S, and then then there was the 4 and the 5D, and then the 7 and the 8S, and every 6 months the technology changes, right? Or on your Apple computers you have Cougar, and then it's Mountain Lion, and then it's Tiger, Mountain Lily, or whatever the operating systems that keep updating and upgrading. Just as technologically your phones or your computers or your operating systems need to be upgraded, in the Baha'i cosmology, the Creator, God, sends down these divine teachers to upgrade the operating systems of humanity spiritually. So humanity right now in this day and age is quite materially successful for the most part, but spiritually pretty backwards still. If you look at some basic stuff like love and compassion and unity, some of these things. So these divine teachers came periodically through history, and they essentially agree. If you look at what they essentially said from the actual people themselves, are very much in alignment it's very, when you read the writings of the Buddha and the actual writings of Jesus, it's almost impossible to tell them apart. Some of the universal teachings, like the Golden Rule, runs through every single religion, right? So these are all divine teachers that come from one creator in this divine cosmology. You with me so far? Mm-hmm. So Baha'is refer to these divine teachers as manifestations. So, manifestations. Forgive me using this. I like writing on things. It's fun. So manifestations. So I love this word, manifestations, because there's a word that's contained within it, manifest. To manifest something, is to bring forth, to live in something. And these divine teachers, according to the Baha'i cosmology, are not just human beings. They're manifesting God. They're God made flesh on the planet, giving God's word to humanity for whatever the specific people, the time and the place that they were speaking to. For the Buddha, it was in Nepal, 2000 BC. For, Abraham, a little before that, and in Babylon, and in Muhammad. For Muhammad, it was 622 in the Arabian Peninsula, and he had a very specific message and mission. And for Jesus, he was speaking again to the Palestinian people, to the Jews in Judea at the year 0, right? So what happens is humanity, Dari and I were just talking about this earlier, humanity corrupts the pure and essential teachings of these divine manifestations. They build up institutions, clergy, and the essentially pure message of these divine teachers gets very corrupted over time, right? Islam became a very violent religion when its roots really were not. Christianity has splintered off. There's much division and judgment, and institutions can be very corrupt. And Baha'is believe that God will always refresh this message and send new divine teachers. So the newest divine teacher is Baha'u'llah. So how do I do this now? I'm going to get into a little bit more of Baha'u'llah's teachings and his life, but that's essentially a little bit about the Baha'i Faith. This is a concept that Baha'is call progressive revelation. So God is progressively revealing these spiritual teachings that humanity desperately needs. And Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah is the most recent of these divine manifestations and has brought the word of God, the Creator, for humanity's spiritual maturation, for humanity's inevitable spiritual maturation, because we either destroy ourselves on our planet or we grow up spiritually. And Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah has brought a toolkit, really, a spiritual toolkit for the spiritual transformation and unification of all of humanity. So Baha'u'llah, as I said, this is the bicentennial. He was born in 1817, and his name was Mirza Hussein Ali. Is that right? And he was born into a noble family in Iran in 1817, so 200 years ago. This is what's astonishing about the Baha'i Faith, is it was so recent. Like, when I was a kid, a guy who had met Baha'u'llah came to stay with my grandparents, and he held me in his lap. So I was held, my grandparents were Baha'is, I was held in the lap by a guy who met Baha'u'llah when he was 17 years old. Like, this is a very, very recent thing. So it's extremely exciting. So Baha'u'llah was a nobleman in Iran, and he was always a very special child. As a young man, he eschewed, he turned his back on living the royal high life, because royalty in Iran back in those days were lauded as revered as gods on earth. And he was known as the father of the poor, and Baha'u'llah spent his childhood caring for the poor and feeding the poor and taking care of the poor. There's a beautiful story that I love about Baha'u'llah as a young man, which is some performers came for a royal wedding at their house. And they brought with them a giant puppet show, kind of like in Sound of Music. You know, up on the hill is a lonely goat. You know, that kind of thing, where they have the marionettes in a big puppet box. So they brought this big puppet box and they did this show, and it was about the Shah and people in the courts and the royalty, and they had a sword fight and someone died and the puppets all spoke to each other. And Baha'u'llah, as a young man, apparently, as a boy, just my son's age, was mesmerized by this puppet show. And so he watched them as they dismantled it, and he said, what's going on here? And they're like, this is the box, here's how we made the walls, and here's how we operated the puppets, and here's how all this stuff worked. And he had this kind of aha moment, this moment of great beauty, and saw that the world was an illusion, much like this puppet show. That these kings, in all their pomp and their glory, with their court power struggles of the court, were nothing but puppets, and it was all essentially an illusion, very much like the teachings of the Buddha. And this inspired Baha'u'llah in his life. Essentially, there was a movement that happened in Iran in the early 1800s called the Baha'i movement. There was another one of these divine teachers called the Bab. I'm not going to go so much into him. The Bab, which means the gate, started a spiritual movement that spread like wildfire through Persia, through Iran at this time. Baha'u'llah was one of the earliest followers of the Bab. Within a year of the Bab declaring his mission, Baha'u'llah became a very active Baha'i follower of the Bab as the Baha'i. He gave up his wealth. He turned his back on his position. And he was a follower of the Bab, believing that, well, I'm going to get to that later. In so doing, he set himself up for a life of pain and hardship and humiliation, because the Muslim clergy really did not like the Baha'i movement or the Bab. They put the Bab to death. And they killed tens of thousands of Baha'is in Persia in the early 1800s in the most horrifying ways. Stuffed them in cannons and shot them out of cannons, put lit candles into their flesh, just horrible means of torture. And Baha'u'llah was tortured, like many of the other early Baha'is were tortured. They whipped the bottom of his feet and made him walk for 100 miles between two cities, stuff like that. They threw him into prison, and the worst prison in Iran, you can imagine, like all the prisons in Iran are probably, this day are probably pretty bad. Back then they were probably even worse. The worst prison in Iran, which used to be an old water cistern underneath Tehran. So you had to take stairs down into this dank stone chamber underneath. And Baha'u'llah had a chain around his neck that was so heavy, the chain was like bigger than him. And he was down there, barely fed, barely given any water, with these other Baha'is. And that's when he had a mystical revelation, Baha'is believe, that Baha'u'llah called it the Maid of Heaven. And don't have the exact quote, but it goes something like, forgive me for paraphrasing, I was but a man asleep upon my couch when, lo, the voice of the Almighty raised me up between earth and heaven and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. That he had this divine revelation, similar to Moses with the burning bush, similar to Jesus with the dove being baptized in the river by John the Baptist, similar to what Muhammad went through. He had a revelation where he understood that he was one of these divine manifestations of God. So there's a lot of different ways to understand Baha'u'llah, and forgive me, this is going to be a kind of a short presentation, and I wish I could go into all the different aspects of who this incredible man is, who this incredible teacher is, but let me just say that one aspect of Baha'u'llah is that he was a poet, the first thing that Baha'u'llah did when he got his revelation is he started writing this kind of spiritually charged poetry. He was banished then from Iran. They learned from the Bab when they killed the Bab, they shot him with a firing squad. It actually spread the Baha'i Faith even more, and it became much more renowned. He became kind of a martyr to his faith. So they thought, well, we're not going to make the same mistake with the next kind of leader of the Baha'i movement, Baha'u'llah. We're going to banish him to the farthest corners of the empire. So they sent him over to Baghdad, and Baha'u'llah then became a mystic. And he left Baghdad and lived up in the mountains of Suleimania and Kurdistan for 2 years with nothing but a robe and a bowl, writing poetry, revealing spiritual works, and removing himself from all the infighting that was happening in the Baha'i community during those dark times after the Bab was killed. So these are some aspects of Baha'u'llah. So we said he's a prophet. He was a nobleman, although turned his back on. He could have had a cush life if he had just kind of he could have stayed in all the royal palaces and had a really nice life, but he turned his back on that. I talked about Baha'u'llah being a poet. I talked about him being a mystic. Another aspect of who Baha'u'llah was an exile. Is that a word? An exile?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a verb and a noun. How about that? 2 in 1. So Baha'u'llah was also exiled from Iran to Baghdad. Then he became essentially the leader of the Baha'i movement and said, I am the Bab. One of the central teachings of the Bab was that there's someone even greater than me that's coming in a very short amount of time. And Baha'u'llah proclaimed himself to be the promised one of the Baha'i Faith, and that the leader of the Baha'i Faith. Then he was exiled. From there, he went to the farthest reaches of the Ottoman Empire, to Adrianople and Constantinople, and then Adrianople, just almost to Bulgaria, so far away. And then he was exiled to Egypt briefly, and then settled in Palestine, in the world's worst notorious prison called Akko in Palestine. And that's where he spent the rest of his life. Was banished, living in prison in Palestine with his family and a handful of friends. He wrote hundreds of tablets and books. I'm going to get into some of his teachings in a little bit. But I would like to read you something. And that is, there was one Westerner who met Baha'u'llah in his lifetime, a famous scholar and Orientalist named E.G. Browne. And E.G. Browne documented the Bab and the Baha'i Faith and the origins of the Baha'i Faith, which came out of the Baha'i Faith. And E.G. Browne wrote in his journals, essentially, what it was like meeting Baha'u'llah. Again, for a Baha'i, in the Baha'i Cosmology, this is pretty awesome. It would be as if someone met Jesus and then wrote a journal about it, or someone met Muhammad and said, today I met this guy Muhammad who's doing all this with the tribes in Saudi Arabia, and it's a pretty, or I met the Buddha, and I went to his meditation class, and it was amazing. We did yoga together, and here's what it was like. So for a Baha'i, it's a pretty exciting thing. And he wrote just a very short little thing about it, but I just wanted to share it with you to give a sense. I passed the curtain and found myself in a large apartment, along the upper end of which ran a low divan, while on the side opposite to the door were placed 2 or 3 chairs. Though I dimly suspected whither I was going and whom I was to behold, for no distinct intimation had been given to me, a second or two elapsed ere, with a throb of wonder and awe, I became definitely conscious that the room was not untenanted. In the corner where the divan met the wall sat a wondrous and venerable figure, crowned with a felt headdress of the kind called a taj by the dervishes, but of an unusual height and make, around which was wound a small white turban. The face on him whom I gazed, I can never forget. Though I cannot describe it, those piercing eyes seemed to read one's very soul. Power and authority sat on that ample brow, while the deep lines on the forehead and face implied an age which the jet-black hair and beard flowing down in indistinguishable luxuriance almost to the waist seemed to belie. No need to ask in whose presence I stood as I bowed myself before the one who is the object of a devotion and love which kings might envy and emperors sigh for in vain. A mild, dignified voice bade me be seated and then continued, "Praise be to God that thou hast attained. Thou hast come to see a prisoner and an exile." An exile, there you go. "We desire but the good of the world and the happiness of the nations, yet they deem us a stirrer up of strife and sedition worthy of bondage and banishment, that all nations should become one in faith, that all humans as brothers, that the bonds of affection and unity between the sons of men should be strengthened, that diversity of religion should cease, and differences of race be annulled. What harm is there in this? Yet so it shall be. These fruitless strifes, these ruinous wars shall pass away, and the most great peace shall come. Do not you in Europe need this also? Is it not this that which Christ foretold? Do we see your kings and rulers lavishing their treasures more freely on means for the destruction of the human race than on that which would conduce to the happiness of humankind? These strifes and this bloodshed and discord must cease, and all humans be as one kindred and one family. Let not a man glory in this that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this that he loves mankind. Such, so far as I can retell," this is E.G. Brown speaking again, "were the words which I myself, besides many others, heard from Baha'u'llah. Let those who read them consider well with themselves whether such doctrines merit death and bonds, and whether the world is more likely to gain or lose by their diffusion." I think that gives a very nice perspective of meeting someone like Baha'u'llah. So, there's an image I'd like to leave you with. I'll use a different color, just to mix it up. I'm crazy that way. An analogy that's quite it's used quite a bit in the Baha'i writings is that of the divine physician. And Baha'u'llah calls all those other divine teachers that I mentioned, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Muhammad, Abraham, divine physicians. So I'll read you a couple quotes about this concept. This is from Baha'u'llah's son, Abdul-Baha, who said, "The prophets of God should be regarded as physicians, whose task it is to foster the well-being of the world and its peoples, that through the spirit of oneness they may heal the sickness of a divided humanity." Baha'u'llah said, "The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of humankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needs in its present-day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age you live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements." I know that was a lot of text. A lot of you English is not your first language. He's basically saying the all-knowing physician has his finger on the pulse of humankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his wisdom the remedy. Every age has its own specific problem. And the issues that the world has today are not the issues that the world had in the past and are not the issues that the world will have in the future. So this is the other aspect of Baha'u'llah. We talked about Baha'u'llah, the poet, the mystic, the exile, the prophet, but the divine physician who has been sent down for this day and age to diagnose the problems with humanity for this day and age. So this is where I'd like to speak of Baha'u'llah as a spiritual revolutionary, because this is a man who's living in prison, tortured, exiled, writing books when he can, sometimes on little scraps of paper, writing letters to the kings and rulers of the world about his mission, about what God has sent him, the message that God has sent him to bring. And he's what he spoke of as a divine physician is really revolutionary for the time. This was in the 1870s, 1880s, for the 1860s through the 1880s for the most part. And if you were a divine physician sent down to humanity for this day and age, hi little kid, how are you? Cute little guy. If you were a divine physician sent down for this day and age, looking at the world, what are some of the issues that you would see, and what would be some of the potential prescriptions that you would offer for those issues? What needs diagnosing about humanity now, as opposed to the Arabian Peninsula in 622, or opposed to Palestine in the year 0, or opposed to Nepal in 1000 BC? What are some of the issues? Anyone? There's a lot, so throw them out there.
Overconsumption.
Countless. I'm sorry?
Overconsumption.
Overconsumption, right? Consumption, so it could be like, consumption is great. You can call that greed, right? Also materialism.
Terrorism.
Sorry?
Terrorism.
Terrorism. Terrorism comes from
Religious differences.
religious disunity, right?
Practical.
Somebody mentioned Donald Trump here.
I will say no comment there. Comes from and fanaticism, right? Religious fanaticism. What else?
Possibility of annihilating the world.
Yes, yeah, the stakes are very high, so
Yeah.
world annihilation.
Självständsflockan.
It's a political.
Yeah, lack of spirituality in the world.
Patriotism.
So
Injustice.
prejudice is a big one. Okay, so this is a big issue. Remember, so Baha'u'llah talked about the elimination of all kinds of prejudice. How revolutionary was that for someone in Persia, imprisoned by the Ottomans and the Persians for his entire life, to talk about eliminating racial prejudice, to eliminate classism, when at that time, people with dark skin were viewed as less than human. Women at that time, and still in much of the world, were viewed as less than human, viewed as donkeys, or viewed as apes. So for a divine teacher in this period of time to say we need to eliminate that all of humanity is one human race, that all of the races are beautiful flowers of a garden, is a revolutionary spiritual concept, even for today, let alone 150, 170 years ago. But racial prejudice, the elimination of prejudice, gender equality, these were all of these issues are teachings that Baha'u'llah brought as a divine position for this day and age. What else?
Nationalism.
Nationalism. Glory not in this that you love your country, but glory rather that you love humanity.
Poverty.
So poverty is a big one. So one of the central teachings of the Baha'i Faith is the elimination of extremes of wealth and poverty. Recently, I read an article that said something like the top 50 richest people in the world own as much as the bottom half of humanity. It's 3.5 billion people. 50 people own as much as 3.5 billion people. Not million, billion people. It's hard to kind of wrap your head around. Now, is there anything wrong with having a lot of money?
No.
No? Is there anything wrong with having made your own way like Bill Gates and invent incredible technology and create a company that allows him to be very wealthy? There's nothing wrong with this. But there is something wrong in this vast imbalance. And it's causing havoc in the world. It's causing disunity and tremendous amount of pain. There's about 1 billion people on the planet that go to bed hungry every night. There's about 1 billion people that live on less than $1.50 a day and go to bed hungry almost every night. My wife and I do programs in Haiti teaching girls, empowering young girls, and we do education and arts and literacy for girls. And most of the girls in our program have never in their lives eaten breakfast. That kind of blew my mind when I heard that. How many of you have never had breakfast? And about half the hands go up. I'll have a glass of water for breakfast. Just to give you a little perspective about the kind of issues that we're dealing with poverty. If there's anything else, you can throw them up. This is plenty. One of Baha'u'llah's central teachings.
Harmony between religion and science.
Harmony between religion and science, yes. That's another teaching of Baha'u'llah. You're a Baha'i, so you're kind of cheating a little bit. We see this tremendous divide right now between faith and science. Like, you're either a person of faith, and Jesus rode a dinosaur, and there's no global warming, or you're a person of science, and there is no God, there's no spirituality, you can't prove these things, so they don't exist, and there's this great rift. I don't know what it's like in Iceland, but in the United States, there's a huge divide between people of faith and people of science. And Baha'u'llah taught that these two forces were actually in great harmony, that science is how the material world works, and religion gives you moral values and gives one kind of a meaning behind it, why things are the way they are, and that they can work together in harmony. There doesn't need to be disunity between them.
One thing is dirty water and lack of water.
Lack of water? Yeah. It's very important, yes.
Say access to education.
Water, access to education, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So these big issues, Baha'u'llah, as a divine physician, in his holy writings, deals with all of these things. So the Baha'i Faith is a very socially progressive religion in the teachings that Baha'u'llah brought. But here's the difference. There are many nonprofits and charities that work on all of these issues. Some work on gender equality, some work on racial prejudice, some work on water, some work on, no one works on materialism, some work on poverty. So there are many organizations that work on these things, but how are they trying to work? They're trying to work politically, they're trying to get petitions signed, they're trying to change laws of government, they're trying to raise awareness. Nothing wrong with any of those actions. Those actions are very, very important. And wherever you go around the world, you'll find Baha'is actively engaged in those kind of local dialogues and discussions and movements. But most importantly, to Baha'u'llah, and again I'm going to skip back into the cosmology of the Baha'i Faith, Baha'u'llah come from the one God, right? The one religion. I didn't really say that. Oh, someone's playing the harp in the corner. That was God. So we talked about the Creator. So this is one God and one religion. It's a gradually unfolding religion, like I said. But really Baha'i view it as one religion. Baha'u'llah called it the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. Because Baha'u'llah also taught that there will be divine teachers that will come in the future, 1,000 years from now. Who knows? That will add to the iPhone updates and the computer updates. But they're gradually continuing to unfold this one religion. So Baha'u'llah as Baha'u'llah, the teaching, again, the one creator, that there's one religion. Baha'u'llah, the manifestation, the prophet, the nobleman, the poet, the mystic, the exile. Most importantly, the divine physician, that Baha'is believe, Baha'u'llah has taught, that there is a spiritual solution to these problems. That ultimately you can pass all the laws in the world about racial prejudice. But if people in their hearts feel that people with dark skin are worse, or dumber, or inferior, or to be feared, or to be hated, if in their hearts they still feel that, it doesn't matter the laws you pass. That these issues, poverty, racial prejudice, gender equality, science and religion, materialism, these are spiritual issues that start in the heart, that start with love, that start with compassion, that start with service to humanity. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I'd love to leave some time for any questions that you might have. I want to just say a couple of things. You guys diagnosed the issues of the world very well. And excellent. You're all excellent little divine physicians in your own way. So good for that. I just want to talk a little bit about, there's 5 or 6 million Baha'is around the world. Iceland has a beautiful Baha'i community here. I come from Southern California. There's a lot of Baha'is there. It's the largest religious minority in Iran, because that's where it started. But it's the second most widespread religion all around the globe. You'll find Baha'is wherever you go. You go to Tonga or Guam or Madagascar or the Netherlands or Honduras. You name it. No matter where you go, you'll find Baha'i communities. And my wife, who became a Baha'i around 10 years ago or so, she would always ask me, well, Rainn, what do Baha'is do? Like, I get it. I get what you believe. What are they doing? What are they actively engaged with? What are the actions that Baha'is are actually doing? This all sounds very nice and airy-fairy and lovely, but is there any meat on the bones? What are you actually doing? And so there are some things that Baha'is do all around the world. No matter where you go in the world, you'll find Baha'is doing some things. Number one is that one of the spiritual solutions to these issues is Baha'u'llah talks about the importance of service. That service is the highest station of humanity. And this is something that it's really important to understand, whether you're a Christian, whether you're an atheist, whether you're a Baha'i, whether you're an agnostic and you have no idea, that the world needs our service. The world needs our work. The world needs people to not just take care of their own comfort and their own happiness. That's kind of the way it is in the United States right now. People kind of feel like, hey, listen, as long as I take care of my family, I have a nice life, I'm happy, as long as I'm not hurting anybody else, great. And that's it. And it stops right there. But we're getting to a place in the world where that's just not going to cut it anymore. That for humanity to progress spiritually, no matter what you believe, we need to turn our efforts towards service to the people that have less. No matter what area you want to devote yourself to the environment, or whether it's education, or it's healing racial prejudice, or eliminating the extremes of wealth and poverty in various ways. Whatever it is that you care most about, wherever you go in the world, you'll find Baha'is in service to humanity, beyond just seeking their own material comfort. Hopefully. There are some other more specific things that Baha'is do, that Baha'is in Iceland are also involved with. and that is Baha'is believe very much in the power of prayer and love to gather with friends of all different religious faiths and share prayers, to read from the Bible. Again, because Baha'is believe in all the world's religions, we read from the Quran, we read from the Bible, we read from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Dhammapada of the Buddha. We read all the holy writings. But we love to have devotional gatherings. Baha'is believe very much in the power of prayer, that this Creator responds to prayer, that prayer has an effect, that it opens hearts. So you'll find those. Baha'is do classes with children and youth, I'll call them pre-teens and teenagers, about service and about spiritual virtues such as compassion, honesty, kindness, love, humility, teaching the children these virtues. And again, this is not to convert these kids to Baha'is. This is to teach these spiritual essentials that whether you're an atheist or a Christian or a Buddhist, no matter what your belief system, we can all get behind wanting our children and our young adults to be more of service in their communities, to be more honest, to be more humble, to be more kind, to be more compassionate. And these are virtues that can be trained. They can be taught, right? Baha'is have some wonderful study circles called Ruhi groups. And if anyone is interested, I'm sure that you could talk to Bee there in the corner, the Irish Icelander, and she can fill you in. It's a wonderful study circles where you learn about the teachings of Baha'u'llah, and in an intimate setting, you read the holy writings of Baha'u'llah and quotes, and you study some deep spiritual concepts like life after death, like the power of prayer, many other different aspects of spirituality. So these are some of the things that are going on in Baha'i communities around the world. And I just want to finish by saying that what do I want to finish by saying? Did I cover everything? Kind of. On this 200th anniversary of Baha'u'llah's birth, you're going to be hearing a lot more about Baha'u'llah and the Baha'i Faith. The communities all over the world are holding gatherings like this, especially in the fall, especially in September and October and November. That's when you guys will be doing some more activities around commemorating Baha'u'llah, letting the world know about who we believe Baha'u'llah is. And listen, bottom line is, there's two choices about Baha'u'llah. Either he is a very wise man, like Dalai Lama or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela. He's a very wise man and writer and philosopher who suffered a great deal and taught peace. Or the other option is that Baha'u'llah is who he says that he is a divinely inspired manifestation of God for this day and age, that he is a divine physician sent down to diagnose the problems of the world today, and that he speaks essentially with the mouthpiece of God for this day and age. So those are essentially the two choices. Whether you believe one or the other, it doesn't really matter. I encourage you to learn more about Baha'u'llah, to read his teachings, to read his writings, to read about his life, to learn more about him. Whether you believe he's simply a wise man like many other wise men, it's perfectly fine for you to believe that. Or whether you believe that he, as Baha'is do, that he holds a special spiritual station. I would just ask you, beyond Wikipedia, to move a little bit farther, to read more about Baha'u'llah, the prayers that he wrote. There's a beautiful book called The Hidden Words that has very tiny little meditations that are spiritual meditations filled with great spiritual power, kind of the distillation of all of spirituality in this one tiny little book. But he wrote hundreds of books and tablets and letters, and there's a great deal of stuff on the web about it. I would encourage you to investigate Baha'u'llah, to think about his life on this, his 200th anniversary. So thank you very much for letting me speak to you. We get these signs. So there's not a specific way of meditating in the Baha'i Faith. It's up to us to choose how that is, but I have a daily practice, except when I'm in our camper. I have a daily practice of meditation. We did a little meditation work at the summer school that I taught, and meditation is a wonderful key to happiness. There's a great writer, Jonathan Haidt, who says that, what if I could give you a pill and it takes 15 minutes to take every day, but it will increase your happiness, it will lower your blood pressure, it will keep you healthier, it will allow you to make better decisions, it will strengthen your cognitive abilities and your productivity, and it's this wonder drug, the way that meditation affects us, and especially it affects our happiness and our joy in the world, yet people so rarely partake in it. And it's simply silencing the mind and realizing that we are one with the universe for a short period of time, and it has incredible benefits.
It's like, this is just about the obligatory prayers. You don't say obligatory prayer in a group. It's individual. It's between you and God. It's not something that you do in a group.
Thank you. Maybe just for a minute, Peter, will there be an kanskje? Is there somebody back there?
Yeah, so I know nothing about the religion, and I have grown up as an atheist, really. And so I don't have really a concept of God. To me, God doesn't really mean anything. So I was just wondering if there's a definition of God in the Baha'i Faith.
Well, there are many writings and many teachings about God and the essential kind of unknowability of God. There's a beautiful, in the prayer that I said, the daily obligatory prayer, we say we've been created to know and to worship God. And then we're also taught in the Baha'i Faith that God is unknowable. So to know the unknowable is our lot in life. And I love that. As an artist, there's a great mystery in trying to know what is unknowable. For me personally, I struggled with this too. I left the Baha'i Faith for a very long time and was just a bohemian artist in New York City and rejected all religion and faith. And I started, when I was very unhappy in my life, I started thinking, well, maybe I just threw God away too soon. Maybe I need to rethink this in a new way. And I read some books, I read lots of different books on spirituality from different faith traditions, and I read books of Native American spirituality. And I read about the god of the Lakota Sioux, who was called Wakantanka. Literally it translates to the Great Mystery. And I was reading about the god of the Native Americans that was found in nature, mostly in nature, timeless, in the seven directions, north, south, east, and west, up and down, in the seventh direction within. The God of our ancestors, a God that exists beyond this world and other physical worlds. And that's when the lights went on for me, when I realized, I could have a conception of God in my own understanding, very similar to this Native American idea of the great mystery. And the mystery of being, the mystery that is science, that is beyond science, that and I think that, again, because of the way religion has kind of been shoved down the throats of many Westerners for centuries, many people reject God out of hand because it goes hand in hand with, a church or some negative experience that they've had. But I would encourage everyone to you go on a spiritual journey to find out what God is. What is God? Beauty, nature, peace, oneness with all things. That we can define God in a number of different ways. So we're all on a journey to find that or to reject that. And that's our choice. So there's a number of great teachings that can help humanity in a number of very practical, spiritual ways. That it allows for great spiritual transformation. And I just want to say again too, Christian or atheist or agnostic or whomever you are, Baha'is would love to just work with you and hand in hand and try and make the world a better place, whether it's teaching children, praying together, working on making our communities better. This is not about becoming Baha'is. You're certainly welcome to become a Baha'i if you'd like, but that's not really what this is about. Everywhere around the world, we're trying to bring people together, unite people. And I know in Southern California, it's really beautiful because a lot of the work we do, especially with youth, inner city youth, in service projects with youth, we work with atheists and we work with Catholics and people of different belief systems, Muslim kids running groups. And it's not about like becoming a member of a religion necessarily. It's about working together to make the world a better place. That's what Baha'u'llah, the divine physician, has brought us. So thank you very much.